Anyway, welcome back to another Last Week in Comics, where I talk about what happened the last weekend. Comic books and other things So this was a very short week for DC. We had two really strong weeks, around December and then also the first week of January. For some reason, they were okay with every book coming out on New Year's and Christmas Day. And then this week there was just barely anything. The big title this week was Aquaman #1. And even then I wouldn't call it that big because Absolute Batman issue 4 came out as well. I'll get into it because I actually didn't read any books this week for some reason. Just nothing I've been reviewing regularly came out, which has been great because I'm moving, but not so great when you have a schedule to keep and you like making content every single day. Anyway, so first up, Aquaman #1. I did not read this personally. I'm not a huge Aquaman fan, and I heard a lot of Aquaman fans were disappointed by it. But I think that was more just because we haven't had a Aquaman book in a while, and what tends to happen when a character hasn't had a book for a while is that the company wants to reestablish a status quo. So for Aquaman, that looks like a lot of the side characters that people have become very attached to, like Mara, Jackson Hyde, Garth, I guess. What's his daughter's name? Not the Aqua Baby one, but the one who gets to live. None of these characters are in it, which was a pretty big selling point in previous Aquaman books. Green Arrow as well had to reestablish a status quo when it got a new ongoing, but you still had a lot of his children around. You had his half sister around. You had a lot of the Arrow family still be there. So I'm kind of questioning why Aquaman doesn't, especially because unlike Green Arrow, Aquaman has had a very popular movie franchise that has kept most of these characters in it. Mara's in all the Aquaman films, so why is she relegated to just a page for this book? But I get it. I get it from a storytelling standpoint. I get it with characters who either don't have as concrete of a status quo or don't have as concrete books. Think about Blue Beetle. Of course it's gonna take a little bit for Brenda and Paco to show up. Art seems okay. Or art seems better than okay. It's pretty good. It's great to have another non-Batman member of the Justice League or just non-Bat-fam in general get a book. I hope it does well. I personally am just not a big Aquaman fan, so I'm not really saving any time for it or spending any money on it, but I hope it does well. I like seeing comics succeed. That's always been my opinion. And I say this before I get into the next one, Absolute Batman #4. Yeah, I dropped this book after the first issue. And I don't regret it. The crazy thing is that even with this book's high amount of sales, I don't necessarily people talking about it as much. From a Twitter standpoint, I think the most that Daystar even talked about this book, and Daystar is a Batman fan despite everything about them, it was barely anything. I think at best they showed us the court scene and that was about it. That's all they sent in the group chat. I don't know. I don't understand the hype around this book, at least in comparison to Absolute Superman and Absolute Wonder Woman. I don't see why this one is the best selling one out of the 3 Absolute books that are out right now, when Superman and Wonder Woman tend to get a lot more praise, especially from online communities and really just anyone who read them. And I know there's that whole Twitter mentality. There's that whole, oh, well, the internet isn't reflective of real life, but I'm I go to comic book shops specifically to talk to people. I like talking to other fans outside of the internet. I go to conventions, I do all of this other stuff, which, yeah, there haven't been conventions since Absolute Batman premiered, but even when I'm going into these comic book shops, I don't really hear people talk about it. They don't strike up a conversation with the person who runs the shop about it. And I find that kind of weird, especially with how much the book is selling. I don't think that they're inflating the numbers. It's Batman, of course, but I do I do think that some of those numbers might be inflated because of stuff like variants and because the first issue sold out so well. And I just hope that that same success happens for Absolute Wonder Woman and Absolute Superman, because I think that those are kind of the better books, if I'm being honest. The main catalyst for this issue, and what it seems that all of the issue 4s of the next set of Absolute Universe books is going to get into, is a lot of origin stuff. In this one in particular, I did see a couple panels floating around of Bruce becoming a younger Batman. We kind of saw, the aftermath of the killing of Thomas Wayne, and kind of see how that shaped Bruce through the court scene, through, I don't think that the people who killed Thomas got acquitted for it, but, we kind of start to see that, build up into becoming Batman. And I think that's actually one of the fun things that, a lot of Batman media does to the character. When they're kind of, writing or adapting Batman, they tend to give him more of a build-up to being Batman, rather than just, an individual, or rather than how the comics kind of do it, which is one day when he was 20, he just decided to be Batman. They show a lot more of that build up prior, or they have him kind of start becoming Batman even when he's a kid. And I always like that. I always find it interesting, but just for some reason Batman comics have never been for me, and continue to not be for me. The closest I'll ever get to touching a Batman comic is when I want to read Cassandra Cain, or when I want to read Stephanie Brown. Not Tim Drake, though. I'll just read Tim Drake solo stuff. I do have one funny thing to say. For some reason, it's so there's 5 books out for DC right now. 4 out of 5 of them are Batman. So the next one is Batman and Robin. I've been loosely following the series for a while. I've been buying it since issue 1, though. And I do remember that they're doing more with the whole Damian deciding that he's not necessarily wanting to continue the vigilante lifestyle. Overall, Batman and Robin has been doing a lot for Damian's characterization and kind of moving him, he came to Bruce when he was 10. They're moving him they're letting him be developed a little bit more, which I greatly appreciate. I don't think Flatline's been in the last couple issues. I miss her. Where is she? It's just been a solid series. I kind of wish that they would have probably waited a little bit to greenlight it, be closer to the movies, because, by comparison with how DC has been doing their releases, they are kind of promoting the comics a lot more alongside it, which is always a plus. And to be quite honest with how questionable I think James Gunn is going to get with Damian and Talia, I would like them to have a book with a fresh new number 1 that I know will treat both of those characters with the care and respect that they deserve, instead of falling back on racist stereotypes, like a certain mutant book did recently. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about that. Fuck Marvel. Boycott that shit until they remove Sabra of Captain America 4. Which isn't likely. She's in fucking everything. Okay. Next up, Batman Dark Patterns. Another Batman book that I just have not heard anything about. This seems to be in the category of comics that I like to call Batman horror, where it's horror, but it's Batman. There's probably a market for it somewhere, but I'm just not that market. And then last on my list for DC Comics is DC vs. Vampires, World War V. Which, again, that is another book that you should continue to not buy, just simply because Otto Schmidt is still doing the art for it, and that man is notoriously a Nazi. He named himself after a Nazi. He should be fired. I genuinely don't know how... I do think that he's getting progressively less work with DC, which is a good thing, but, he needs to be gone. I'm really hoping that this series ends with such poor sales that he's gone, and we never have to see him again. I don't wish that on a lot of comic writers, if I'm being honest. I know people kind of assume that I'm a hater, but I'm not. I think some writers, just need a little bit more research, and they'll be fine. There's one fun thing that I want to talk about specifically that came out this week for DC, that got me really excited. It's the DC Style Guide. So if you didn't know, for a while there, when DC was licensing out their characters to be put, well, all brands pretty much have style guides when they're licensing out their characters to be put on merchandise. And usually these are never seeing the light of day. You might get a couple screenshots or a couple scans of it popping up occasionally on the internet, but none of them never really get like a full reprinting, a full consumer reprinting. But DC has been kind enough to grace us with their I think in my video I said 1982. It's actually their 1985 style guide. And it's just such like a perfect encapsulation of DC history. And I love that we get this like published in the mainstream. So because like not only do you have I'm thinking of all that because I took pictures and I'm gonna have some pictures of it like popping up here. It did cost me like $95, but I enjoy like coffee table books like that. Like I have both of Alex Ross's like Mythos and Marvelocity books that he published where it just has a bunch of his art in it. I'm literally looking at my pile of books right now. Of course, I have all three Justice League International Omnis because my opinion of Omnis, they're not good for reading. They're really good for displaying and flipping through occasionally. I love books of this caliber, and for DC to release one, and not only just release one, but release one that has that pretty much would never have seen the light of day if they didn't release it, is just so fascinating to me. And like so, I'm gonna show a couple of my favorite pages up on the side because one of my favorites is they have a couple pages where they're describing the like basic backstory for all of their characters, so people like know this when they're making merchandise for it. I think that's very cool to see how DC would describe some of these teams. And then my favorite page is actually the Pantone page. So apparently DC has like standards of color that they use, and or back then at least it was consistent. So like if you saw like the color yellow in a DC comic, there was 5 different yellow tones that they used, and they each have like a number marking telling you which one it is, and then a Pantone color that it has to be. And so you have like an entire page of that. And I just love it so much. I love it. I think that if you're an artist, you'll definitely see some value in this book. I think even if you're just a DC fan or a fan of like the older like 80s art style that DC used to have and promote a lot, I think you would like it. I love it when stuff like this gets published. It's my favorite thing in the world. It's just so fun. I'm like thinking about it again. I'm gonna pull it back out and just stare at it. Oh, and then also like the coolest thing in it is that it's also very like a time capsule. It's a time capsule in itself of what DC used to be. If you notice something about specifically the year 1985 that they chose, that's right before Crisis on Infinite Earths happened. That's right before the Charlton characters got brought in, and it's so nostalgic in a way that I didn't realize that I could be nostalgic for. There's also like the Super Friends logo. So if you see like okay, so Blue Beetle specifically was not someone that was a part of the DC Style Guide because of course he wasn't. He's a Charlton character pre 1986. But like this logo right here and a lot of the packaging that McFarlane's using on these toys is reminiscent of that same style that's in the style guides. And so like specifically the Superpowers logo, you actually see like the black and white sketches of it that they were workshopping to people who were going to make their toys eventually. And it's so cool. It's actually really funny that the 2 like DC like superpower like figures I have are characters who notoriously never appeared in the original line. Like, I have Booster Gold and Blue Beetle, characters who wouldn't make their debut until the next year, 1986. Although, what's really fun about this book, too, is that, like, Mr. Miracle gets a page. Like, Mr. Miracle and Orion both get a page. And I'm like, huh, that's kind of crazy because those characters, New Gods in general, and The Fourth World by Jack Kirby, like, yeah, it was around in the 70s, but it really didn't get reutilized too much until 2 years after the Style Guide, when Mr. Miracle 87 premiered, and of course, Mr. Miracle started appearing in the Justice League book. So it's just interesting to see. And I love this page so much, or I love this book so much. I really hope that the high sales of it will encourage both DC and other companies to start printing their older style guides, because it's a piece of history, and I love it, and I love everything about it. It is so great. Okay, I do just want to give a couple shout outs to indie comics. Of course, just in general, you're gonna see a lot less talk about these, but some of these I find interesting that they're premiering, some of these I'm actively buying. So yeah, so from Image, the shout out I really want to give is Transformers. I've been hearing that the Transformers comics have been doing quite well, and that they are also quite good. So if you're a fan of the series, if you're a fan of Michael Bay's, maybe not if you're a fan of Michael Bay's vision, but, you know, if you're a fan of, like, Bumblebee 2018, you would probably enjoy these. From Boom Studio, I want to give a shout out to Jim Henson Presents. Boom Studio has been one of the companies that has gotten at least some of the licensing to Jim Henson's other work. It features 4 stories based on different Jim Henson productions, not the Muppets, of course, because the Muppets are owned by Disney, but so not the Labyrinth. Not the Labyrinth as well, because that is being handled by a different comic company right now. I think you should read it. Stack's been really enjoying it. Jim Henson's Presents has a story from Fraggle Rock. It's called Beauty is in the Pie of the Beholder. Farscape, which is called Last One There's a Rotten Food Cube. The Dark Crystal, of course, which is called The Heretic and the Wanderer. Have I been saying four stories this entire time? I meant 3. I'm bad at reading. God, I started scrolling down and looking at the Fraggle Rock one. It's adorable. I love it. I love that Jim Henson's creations, even though they're probably not really that profitable to get another movie or adaptation, they are still getting a second life in comics, specifically Farscape, because I think that the Dark Crystal got like a Netflix thing, and Fraggle Rock is back, which is good because Fraggle Rock fucking rocks. Next shout out I want to give is to Dynamite, mostly because I saw this at my comic book shop, and I considered picking it up if I wasn't already spending more money than I have. So it's Green Hornet, Miss Fury. I didn't realize that they were still publishing Green Hornet comics. I think that's just cool and interesting. I'm not a huge fan of Green Hornet, but I like some of those older characters continuing to still see the light of day in some capacity. Also with Dynamite, they have a Zootopia comic, and I'm only bringing up this Zootopia comic because for some reason we looked it up. They have 24 variants attached to it, which I think is just insane. It's an insane number of variants for a Zootopia comic. Like, is Judy Hopps Lover 69 the one you're, like, chasing after with all of these? Like, what? And then, of course, last but certainly not least, because they hire my best friend Ryan North, IDW Comics. IDW actually had a pretty good week in terms of releases. Star Trek Defiant came out, which I haven't been hearing a lot about the non-Lower Decks books, but I think that's just because, unlike the Lower Decks books, I'm not friends with the author. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Nation. I'm just happy that they're still publishing Turtles comics. I've been hearing good things about it. I know Ion's been recently reading some of them, or some of the older ones, and I've always been meaning to check it out. And of course, if you are more in the Saturday morning crowd of liking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles instead of the dark and gritty original Turtles, there's always now Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Saturday Morning Adventures. I think that's really fun. I think it's really fun to turn like some of these Saturday morning animated adventures back into comics. I think it's cute. I think it's great. I'm just happy that comics are publishing. I'm just happy that comics exist. I love comic books. So as always, that's it for last week in comics. Hopefully, with TikTok being banned, I start getting more followers on here. But alas, me already's, I don't think that's happening. If you like hearing me talk about comics, I also do a live show every weekend. Ash and Their Fantastic Friends happens Saturday 9 p.m. The previous episode will be up already, where I think I'm gonna be building IKEA furniture pretty much the entire time because I just moved. And then, so that might be your next recommended video, which is gonna be up here. Yeah, so that might be your next recommended. The playlist for the other last week of comics is gonna be down here. If you want to see what happened the first week of January or all of December and November, it'll be right there. I'm going to continue publishing these, hopefully every Sunday. I try and make the Sunday deadline, but sometimes it's just a little too much in the week. But yeah, if you like it, click subscribe too. Subscribe is over here. Yes, I framed this perfectly. I'm good at YouTube. I'm not just making it up as I go along. Like, subscribe, follow me on my other platforms, my Twitter, my Tumblr, I guess, my Blue Sky, whatever other social medias I have at this point. Anyway, I'm trying to, because I've been holding my mic this entire time, and usually I do that cut at the end, but, I'm trying to, balance it. Okay, this is the best we're getting. And cut.